This is a neuron. A neuron is a cell that is differentiated in the G0 phase of the cell cycle, meaning it doesn't act like your typical cell. Neurons are the cells that are responsible for transmitting signals throughout the body. Whenever your body receives incoming stimuli, neurons transfer a signal to the brain telling what the stimulus is. The signal is called an action potential. The neuron is made up of 4 key parts. The dendrites, which receive incoming information. The cell body, which possesses and interprets the information. The axon, which carries a signal across long distances. And the axon terminal, which transmits the signal to the next neuron. The process of an action potential begins in the dendrites, where receptor cells receive a stimulus. If this stimulus is strong enough, the signal is transmitted along the entire length of the axon. The neuron either transmits the signal if the stimulus is strong or does not transmit a signal, resulting in an all or none response. Transmitting an action potential down an axon is actually a very complex process, despite it only taking around 1/5 of a second. This complexity is largely due to the imbalance of charged ions on the inside and outside of the neuron. When a neuron is at rest, the outside of the neuron has a higher concentration of sodium ions outside of the cell than inside, and the concentration of potassium ions is higher inside than outside the neuron. This imbalance results in the neuron having a negative charge compared to the surrounding environment. An action potential is really the neuron changing to a positive charge, which is caused by the movement of these charged ions. These ions, however, are far too large to diffuse through the membrane of the neuron. This is where the sodium channel, potassium channel, and sodium-potassium pump come into play. These membrane-bound proteins allow for the sodium and potassium ions to travel across the membrane via facilitated diffusion.
An action potential begins when an electrical current is sent through the axon, causing the sodium channels to open. Because the inside of the neuron has a negative charge compared to the outside of the neuron, positively charged sodium ions rush into the cell to balance the change. The incoming sodium ions, however, overshoot the necessary amount to balance the charges and cause the inside of the neuron to become more positive than the outside of the cell, referred to as being depolarized. This depolarization is a signal that is sent to the terminal axon and to the next cell. This neuron, however, cannot fire again properly until it has been repolarized. To repolarize, the potassium channel opens, causing the high concentration of potassium ions inside the neuron to flow out of the cell, balancing the charges inside and outside of the neuron. There is still an issue here, in that more potassium is outside the cell and more sodium is inside of the cell, the opposite of what the neuron started with. This is remedied by the sodium-potassium pump, which exchanges 3 sodium ions for every 2 potassium ions. The ions are returned to where they started, and because more sodium was pumped out of the neuron than potassium was pumped into the neuron, the outside of the cell is again more positively charged than the inside. The neuron has finally returned to its resting state and is ready to be fired again. And that is how an action potential travels down a neuron, sending a signal throughout the body. Thank you for your time. A like and subscribe would be appreciated, and as always, stay curious.